Welcome back to part 3. So how do we give medicines legally then? We don't write prescriptions, so let's have a think about how we actually get around giving these. There's actually, in the Human Medicines Regulations 2012, there's different schedules of it. And if you have a look under Schedule 17, if you click on this link, there's a set of regulations that allow registered paramedics to give medicines. So if you go all the way down the list, you'll see sort of people on lifeboats and things like that listed. And then 17 is there's a bit about registered paramedics, and it lists a number of drugs that we can give under Schedule 17. Now note that student midwives are on that list, but student paramedics are not. So it's really important with the Schedule 17 medicines that it's only you that gives that drug or another registrant. You can't hand that syringe over to a student paramedic or somebody else to give it, because you're the only one that's allowed to do that. The Schedule 19 are the ones in an emergency. So it lists things like adrenaline for anaphylaxis, I believe. I always have to look these things up. But these ones, because you can give them in an emergency and it doesn't list who gives them, it means that you can hand that syringe over and let somebody else administer, as long as they have the training and the trust has the governance in place to look after them, and they're allowed to do that under the sort of guise of their training. So just make sure that before your shift starts, they've been trained up and they're allowed to do that before you hand that syringe over. But legally, you're allowed to do that because it's in an emergency and it authorises anybody to give those. There's an article here that I've hyperlinked by Ed England. I'll probably have to send you these hyperlinks actually, but it's a really good article, and it just shows you a sort of a talk around all the sort of legislation relating to medicines in ambulances, because it is quite complicated. But that's how we give them. So how else do we supply them? We have a set of PGDs. So if it's not on one of those lists, then we have to give it by a PGD. And I'll talk more to you in your third year about this. But that is a set of instructions, and it tells you what the indication is, what you can give it for, and what you can't give it for. And you can't step outside of that. So it's really important to understand that that is what it is. So if it says TXA for a traumatic bleed, it means you can't give it for a nosebleed or pregnancy related bleed and things like that. So just be really careful with that. PGDs are the sort of the letter of the law, really. If it says you can't give it, you can't give it. Unless you talk to the governance desk and try and get around it that way, your desk in control. Salbutamol is a little bit of a funny one. So those Schedule 17 and 90s, they only cover injectables. They don't cover the other meds. So salbutamol is given through a bit of a loophole in the law at the moment. But that does allow us the freedom to let people like our community responders give them. So at the moment, the Pharmacist Network's looking into this one to try and get us a little bit more watertight with the law, but we're currently giving it as a sort of a bit of a loophole in the law, which is odd. And then on to another topic. So drugs are given really daft names. They're really hard to remember. But there's different types of names that you should be aware of that are out there. First of all, drugs get a chemical name. So things like 1,4-ethoxy-3,6,7 hydromethyl, blah, 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 methyl piperazide. So that would be piperazide, and then all the little side chains have been changed, and it shows you which ones they've changed there. Not very easy to remember. So they then get another name. So the second name they get is either it's called a generic or a scientific or a non-proprietary name, all the same thing. And the one that I'm thinking is sildenafil. So you might have heard of that one, but sildenafil is the name of a medicine, and that is its generic, scientific or non-proprietary name. It also gets another name, and this is what the drugs company call it. So just a sort of quick point of note, the generic name is something that has to be authorized. You can't just call it Sam's drug or something like that. So things like all your beta blockers will end in olol, and you can just call it the first bit whatever you want, as long as it's not sort of Mickey Mouse olol, but it has to be authorized. But your brand name or your trademark or your proprietary name, they can be given by the drugs company. And the one I'm thinking of here for sildenafil is Viagra. So we all know that one, don't we? And note it's got a capital letter because it is its name. It's also sildenafil's licensed as Revatio, and that one's given for pulmonary hypertension. And the reason is because there's an awful lot of marketing around medicines. That company said they didn't really want something to be sort of associated with something that you take for sort of sexually related disease and people to be sort of embarrassed by it. So they've given it two names, Viagra and Revatio, and they're the same thing. Sildenafil's in the packet. So somebody's written a paper about this, about multiple brand names can be confusing. And they got it published. Well done. Talk about stating the obvious. So I've written this one, do not breathe under the water, because I think that's pretty much the same sort of level of sort of insight as well. So yeah, it is really confusing. All these names are terrible. Right, stop there. Another one coming up.